Hi BookTube, and welcome to a new video, my final one for 2023, and therefore seems a sensible time to do my top reads of 2023. So as per usual, I'll start with my reading stats. So I read 141 books over the year, which compared with 144 last year, so pretty close. Come September, I was on course to smash past the 150 mark, but then in late October I started writing a new novel of my own, which meant that my reading dropped off a cliff because a lot more of my free time is devoted to writing, but also there's that thing of not really wanting to have stuff leaking by osmosis just because I currently happen to be reading it, not wanting it to leak into my own work. So it did rather slacken off towards the last 4 months of the year. So of the 141 books, 128 were works of fiction or poetry, 12 were non-fiction, and one is uncategorised, which I have a dedicated video. I shall post the link to it. It's Belly the Blue Whale by Andy Stanton, because it's a novel written with and interrogating ChatGPT. So it's both fiction and non-fiction. So I couldn't really categorise it. Which also leaks into my my ratings. There were 2 1-star books, there were 11 2-star books, there were 29 I rated 3-star, 43 I rated 4-star, 1 I rated 4.5-star because I really couldn't decide whether that should have gone down to a 4 or up to a 5. It was just impossible. And there were 54 I rated 5 stars, and all the books I'll be talking about today, well, not all, but all the ones that made my top of my categories were all 5-star, at least I assume they were. And of the fiction, 30 were from British writers, 36 were from American writers, and 62 were from the rest of the world. 86 of all books were written by men, 55 were written by women, so that's 61% men, 39% women. 8 were by LGBTQ plus authors, and 10 were from persons of colour or First Nation authors. And in terms of the geographical spread, again this only relates to fiction, 7 were from Canada, 3 from Argentina, 1 from Colombia, 1 from Chile, 1 from Brazil, 1 from Tunisia, 1 from Lebanon, 1 from Iran, 2 from Australia, 1 from Thailand, 1 from the Philippines, 1 from Vietnam, 1 from South Korea, and 1 from China. And as for Europe, 13 were from France, 4 were from Spain, 3 were from Ireland, 3 were from Germany, 2 were from Austria, 1 was from Switzerland, 1 Holland, 1 Belgium, 1 Italy, 1 Denmark, 1 Sweden, 1 Norway, 2 Poland, 1 Slovenia, 1 Ukraine, 1 Serbia, 1 Romania, and 1 Russia. So those, I think, are all my reading stats. I'm just going to check back. Yeah, that's everything. So I can close that window and keep open my prompt, because I found it increasingly hard over the last 3 years to pick a book of the year and then 9 others and order them numerically from sort of second favourite down to 10th favourite. It just hasn't seemed possible, and I haven't had a standout book since the years when Valeria Luiselli's The Lost Children Archive won, and David Markson's This Is Not a Novel won. So what I did last year, I can't remember if I did it the year before, but what I did last year and what I'm going to do this year is I have various categories of my own devising. They may or may not accord with sort of logical book categories, and I've awarded the top read in all of them, or top couple of reads, honourable mention, and there's one category that I will talk about at length because it does seem to have predominated my reading this year. So, on to the books. So the first category is poetry, and there were 2 clear winners. Oh no, that was a category I didn't talk about, curses. Sorry, let me go back. So of the 128 fiction, there was one collection of short stories, there was one graphic novel and 15 poetry. There was also one play, but it's not counted in my total of reads for the year because it's part of this book, Karel Čapek, RUR and War of the Newts. RUR is a stage play, War of the Newts is a novel. And I've read the play. I haven't yet read the novel. I will read that this 2024. Then I will rate the book. So I have read the stage play, but I haven't included any of my stats. And the reason I got this is because one of my one-star reads of the year, i.e. one of the two worst books I read this year, was Jaroslav Kalfar's follow-up to The Spaceman in Bohemia, which came out quite a few years ago now, and I loved and made my top 10 books of the year. This is his second novel, and it was dreadful. But it did refer a lot to the War of the Newts, War with the Newts. And I bought this because I wanted to see how much work on the original material of Karel Čapek Jaroslav Kalfar had done. But I didn't get round to reading this in order to compare. I would have been very annoyed if he just lifted the text from Čapek rather than doing any work on it himself, but I'll have to work that out next year, not this year. So, now I can close this window definitively. And on to, as I say, the first award, which is poetry. So of the 15 books I read, head and shoulders the best is Anne Carson's Knox, which is a sort of concertinaed work. So although it looks massive, it's actually not a terribly long read. I would say that every book I'm going to talk about, I will post the link to the fuller review. I'm not going to give full reviews in this sort of awards ceremony. And the other book of poetry I really liked was Don't Let Me Be Lonely by Claudia Rankine. Both of these are sort of prose poems, you know, they're not the traditional form of poetry. Both are inquisitions into death, and Carson's was prompted by the death of her brother. I have to say that Carson and Rankine invariably never fail me, and they probably would always win awards if I happened to be reading any of their work in any one year. They're just, you know, head and shoulders the two best poets that I know of. But I will give an honourable mention for, I think this might even be a debut collection, Eat or We Both Starve by Irish poet Victoria Kennefic. And it's a brilliant, I feel, set of poems about every aspect of food and eating, so from Holy Communion, cannibalism, the idea of nourishment, eating disorders, going vegetarian because you're repulsed by meat. And I just found it really, you know, a mixture of visceral but with great beauty, which is quite hard to pull off. So definitely an honourable mention for this collection. And I'm really looking forward to her new collection, which comes out in February. So that was first category, poetry. Now, my second one is going to be one of those sort of rather mad Mark Nash ones, because I can't explain this, but I always have a thing for the quality of sound, or writing about sound, both fiction and non-fiction. It's something I'm particularly drawn to when it's done well, in the way that I'm not drawn to writing about smell, the sense of smell. That doesn't interest me. And in that category, we have another debut novel. This is Fire Rush by Jacqueline Crooks, British author of Afro-Caribbean descent. And it's about sort of 70s dub reggae, and it captures somehow brilliantly the sound of dub reggae, the rhythms of dub reggae, the sort of the spiritual yearning at the heart of it, while being, you know, a solid sort of novel with slightly thrillerish elements. And over and above that, and describing the, you know, the sort of sound of the music, I think she has some really, really good images and visual imagery of things within the book that aren't, you know, just the ones related to sound. There was one about sort of driving a car in a getaway with the rain, and the white lines at night, and the white lines on the road sort of veering up into the windscreen that, you know, she's, you know, leaning forward into. They're like arrows of her pursuers, as if they're firing arrows. There's a lot of, you know, really good writing in here. So that wins the Music Quality of Sound Award. But it's more than just that, I feel. There are elements of Jamaican patois in it, but they're not overly difficult to wrangle with. So the next category is one that has several books I just want to talk about by way of sort of comparison, and it's that sort of wideish category of faux memoir that runs all the way through to autofiction. Now, I've always said, and I still believe, autofiction is, it's not an oxymoron, as in how can autobiography be fictional. It's actually tautologous, because to me all writing embraces the element of the author's autobiographical detail. Good writers in fiction do a lot of work on their material to disguise it, whereas I believe that writers of memoir and autobiography and things like that are deluded. The mere act of and Annie Ernaux says this, and Annie Ernaux won the Pulitzer Prize, or was it the Pulitzer or the Nobel? No, it's the Nobel Prize for Literature this year, so she should know. And she's always denied that her writing is autofictional. And the way she does that is she says that it's all the events that she writes about really happened to her, but the moment she sets them down within the artifice of a narrative, of an organised narrative, that renders it fictional. And that sort of applies across the gamut of these books. So To Write As If Already Dead by Kate Zambrano was a terrific book. And it's really about an essay that she has to write on a French author, which took her 2-3 years when she had a young child. So you get a lot of the essay, a lot of the research of the essay, and you get a lot of her personal life. So in a way, this is autofiction, not that I accept that's a category. And then you get a biography, but it's not, this is a novel. It's, Lance Olsen doesn't call his works biographies. He calls them fiction, novels. This happens to be with David Bowie at the centre of it. And I love Lance Olsen's work. He's an author I discovered this year and read 3 of his books and have 2 more on my shelves to read. And it's a equivocal work about David Bowie because it offers, different ways of reading and going into the man. But it offers them in the way the novel is structured as, it's deliberately done as artifice. It's not done as an open-minded biography. And then we come to Mark O'Connell, A Thread of Violence, which is ostensibly a biography about a criminal in Ireland. And it's really interesting because this does suffer the fate of, why you can't write biography and memoir and call it non-fiction. O'Connell admits that the guy that he's creating the biography of never really lets him in to understanding why he did these murders, and that he never really nails down this character. It also fails for O'Connell to actually interrogate himself as to why he's interested in this guy. There's a sort of happenstance and a synchronicity that the guy was arrested in a block of flats where O'Connell's own grandparents lived, and that, and O'Connell was a child at the time, and that stayed with him and resonated with him. But he never really interrogates as to what leads that to be a drive. Once he bumps into this guy after he's been released from prison after 30 years, O'Connell doesn't really dive deeply into why he's on the mission to write this book. And interestingly, a friend of his in the book points out to him by saying, if you can't nail this character down and reproduce, all the facts of his life, which you can't, then you are writing fiction. And the problem with writing fiction is that 2 people really died at the hands of this guy, and you're fictionalizing it. Whether you're intending to or not, you believe that you're writing a biography, but actually you're fictionalizing it. You're writing a novel because you can't get to the heart of the matter, the heart of this guy. And indeed, the killer was the basis of a character in some of the work of John Banville's, which is, overtly fictional, overtly novels. So this was a very interesting book on purportedly being non-fiction, but actually being reduced to fiction with a pretty easy snap of the fingers. Then we have Catherine Lacey's Biography of X. So this is a fictional biography of a person who never really existed. which is particularly interesting because it's like a speculative alternative history element to it, as if the the southern states of America succeed again in the 21st century on the basis of religious and moral lines, which I think was a really interesting thread here. And this is very much in the line of faux biography, of fiction, which takes as its subject matter the nature of biography, which in a way this should have been in many ways. And this follows very much on the lines of Trust by Hernan Diaz, which was in my top 10 last year, which is in a way, I never read memoirs, absolutely, but I seem to have read a lot of these books, as I say, on this spectrum of auto-fiction through memoir, false memoir, novels posing as memoir, all that kind of stuff. That's sort of been the dominant theme of books I've read this year, in the sense of I've read more books on that than on anything else. So I'm interested in breaking down the barriers between fiction and non-fiction, and having these type of non-fiction actually recategorised and declared as fiction. But the book that carries it off, that wins, is Michael Winkler's Grimmish, which I thought was an absolutely brilliant book. It's, starts off by being about a freak show boxer from Philadelphia, but who's touring Australia. Basically, he feels no pain, so he's a human punch bag and makes money by taking punishment from the local boxers and have a go boxers around rural Australia in the early 20th century. But increasingly, it's sort of transforming over into Michael Winkler and his life, what he shares in common with this guy, and the job of being a writer, and becoming a literary human punch bag, trying to get your book published, and then all the criticism that comes out. And it becomes more and more about Winkler's motivation, because he's told this story. The character of Michael Winkler in this is told the story by his grandfather, who remembered it back from the early 20th century. And again, it's this sort of confusion of the real and the non-real. But I just thought this was wonderful. So this definitely wins the category of memoir, faux memoir, autofiction, biography, etc., etc. Highly recommended. And on to the next category. So I like ideas, novels of ideas, but they have to be executed well. They still have to be executed in the form of a novel, of some sort of story with characters. I don't just want to be preached at. And in a couple of different ways, I have a couple of different winners. So the first is In Ascension by Martin McInnes, which made the book a long list. And this is a book of scientific exploration into the nature of the cosmos, so bigger than mankind, but very much with mankind as its observers, experimental observers, journeying out first into the deeps and depths of the ocean, the unexplored ocean, and then out into space. And it's about us really needing to roll back and humble ourselves and take acknowledgement of our true scale in the cosmos as being, random bits of matter formed by random chemical equations that produce DNA. And as I say, I just thought it had great vision, great scope. It had a pretty decent, solid story at the heart of it about two sisters and their responsibilities for an ageing mother. But it was also on the cosmic, investigation of the cosmic scale. So Martin McInnes in Ascension. And this was about the cosmos. This is Femme by Romanian, I think she's a poet, I think this is her only novel, Magda Carnecci, translated from the Romanian by Sean Cotter. This is a cosmic novel as well, but in a very different way. What I like about this book particularly is I don't agree with any of the ideas in it, but I was still absolutely captivated by how that argument was made in this book. And it's basically an argument for an alternative way of embracing life and thinking about the world from sort of a feminist perspective as against the patriarchal establishment society that we have. Now, those are ideas I'm absolutely with, but the kind of slightly new age, non-materialistic, holistic sort of sense in which the argument is made here is not one that I can, as a methodology, is not one that I can ever sort of get with. But I just thought the language, I mean, you could tell she's a poet. The language was fabulous. And I was absolutely carried away by the argument of this book. It's not an argument, but it's a different way of viewing the world. And yeah, I just loved it. 5 stars. Well, obviously they're all 5 stars. I don't know why I said that. And another idea, book of big ideas, but this was in a different way. This was The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut, and this could almost file into that sort of faux biography or novelistic rendition of biography, or novel with a biography at the heart of it, that I spoke about earlier. So this is about really a polymath, about Johann von Neumann, who was at the centre of so many of the big ideas of the 20th century, such as the atom bomb, such as some of the breakthroughs in maths, such as around infinity and things like that. So he was absolute genius, and being a genius, obviously he was quite flawed as a person and making relationships and all of that. So the big ideas are ideas that were scientifically proposed and offered. And it's, in a way, it's a sort of a chronology of that. But then we get a very interesting final part about sort of AI and chess playing computers, and then Go, the game Go playing computers, which follows out of where von Neumann was sort of heading towards with sort of AI ideas that he had before he died. So it's not a book that leaps off the page in the way that you know Fem absolutely does in terms of linguistics. But it's a very comprehensive review of some of the big ideas of the 20th century and the scientific breakthroughs, because they were all centred, or at least this guy had a finger in all of those pies, this Johann von Neumann. So I enjoyed it, and I got, what it did was put in perspective, in a way, the 20th century for me through, as I say, through these scientific ideas and breakthroughs. And onto a wholly different category. This is postmodernism. I bought a lot of books from Dalkey Archive this year, and this was head and shoulders the best of them. This is public reading followed by discussion, where an author has an appointment to give a public reading and then a audience discussion afterwards. She doesn't want to do it, so she sends along someone in her place, although she sits in the audience to see how this person does. And she's given instructions to this person to not actually read anything, but just to start with a discussion and to be led where the audience goes. So it's very sort of postmodernist, what's really going on. It's all happening at the symbolic level. What does it mean to be a writer? What does it mean to have a text when there's no text? How can you have a discussion when no ideas have been offered in a text? All this sort of thing. I just thought it was fabulous. And on to what I call the Bravura Writing Award. I haven't actually got this, it's in my shed. So this is Richard Millward's Man-Eating Typewriter, which is a book written partly in the Polari language, which is a language adopted by the homosexual gay community, because it was like a private code in the same way as prisoners have their slang and other sort of outsider groups have their slang. It's in order not to be eavesdropped on in any meaningful way, and just because it's in Polari, plus it has this incredible energy to it and the main character. As I say, this wins the Bravura Writing Award. It's an unsettling plot. It's basically, I don't want to go into too much detail, but this guy says he's going to create the greatest crime known to man on a certain date, and he's going to send a chapter a week up until that date about his life to this publishing house, and he wants them to publish it after this great crime has been unveiled. And the crime itself, you think, well, what possibly could, what could be greater than 9/11, etc., etc. And the crime itself, again, I don't want to give too much away, it isn't as sort of impactful and across the world, global, as 9/11, but it's shocking in its own way. So I thought that was skillfully pulled off, having set himself up for a great fall that he couldn't actually deliver on this crime. He kind of does. So very impressive. But the language and the energy and the ebullience of the novel is it's just superb. Okay, so now we come to two books in what I call the Mark Nash wheelhouse. So Claire Kilroy, Soldier Sailor, is a book about motherhood, but it strips and tears down the sort of idealistic image of the mother as some sort of angel, or this is her vocation to bring children into the world, and isn't everything about motherhood wonderful? This is quite acerbic. It's also quite poetic in its way. And I say it's a Mark Nash book because obviously my most successful book to date was Three Dreams of the Kia G, which in less poetic fashion, I have to say, than this, dealt with similar themes. So this is the Mark Nash Three Dreams Award winner, Claire Kilroy, Soldier Sailor. And then the most Mark Nash book that I read this year was Amelie Smith, Threadripper. She's Danish and it's translated by Jennifer Russell. And this is a book about, on the left-hand side of the page, she's been given a commission by the government to make a piece of public art. And on the right-hand side is the research and what it sets off in her. And it's never entirely clear what the public work of art that she comes up with, but the research is mainly about the history of how weaving was adapted by Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace, who was Lord Byron's daughter, and she was sort of mathematical prodigy, and she worked with Babbage, and they produced the first sort of primitive, what they called an infernal machine, but it's basically a proto-computer, and then how that's sort of gone into the modern day. And it's all about sort of modes of thought, it's about feminism, it's about sort of algorithms and how, they predominate our world today. And it's just that sort of structure of two different or parallel narratives, one in the real world, one in a sort of fictional, created, out of research world. And I just loved it, I absolutely loved it. And the next award is just a good fun read, nothing more, nothing less. So this is The Annual Banquet of the Gravediggers Guild by Matthias Enard, translated by Frank Wynne. I'm a big Enard fan anyway, and in a way I felt this was just a sort of more knockabout for fun. It didn't enlighten and provoke thought as much as some of his earlier novels like Zone, but it's no less a book for that. It's funny. It is about the French countryside, and in a way the crisis that it's in the way that that Michel Houellebecq what was it, Serotonin book was, but I hated Serotonin. I really wasn't interested, and yet here Enard made me interested in the current French countryside. And it's basically a story of a guy doing sociology. He's got a project on the French countryside, so he goes to live in the French countryside for a year, and how he is weaned off his urban student lifestyle and becomes enmeshed and becomes a rural citizen and proud of it. But the centrepiece of it is the Guild of Gravediggers, who hold this annual banquet for 3 days to celebrate, burying the dead. And apparently, according to legend, no people die in those 3 days because, of course, there's no one to bury them. And this is a book of excess in the style of those sort of French novels which sort of luxuriate in the descriptions of food and drink, and it's very much in that fashion and very funny. But as I say, to me it was just a good fun read, no more no less. And on to Poupée Masagi, an Iranian American, and I give this award. This is called Trans Relating House One, and I gave this award for the social historicism through fiction, which is, to me, notoriously hard, because how can you encompass a whole society through the eyes of the lead character or a few characters? And I always find that scaling from the individual concerns of a few people up to great social concerns, I find that unconvincing and very hard to believe in. She does it really well here. This is about the Iranian clampdown in 2009 on an opposition movement after dodgy election results, and just the way of counting the dead. You know, she very much acknowledges Robert Bolano's 2666 and the story about all the missing women. I hate 2666, and I couldn't understand where that chapter was heading. But in here, it's absolutely rooted in profundity and meaning and context. It made a lot more sense. So I just thought this was a terrific job of providing a kaleidoscope of one single society, which of course there's never such thing as a single society. But when it's a society ruled tyrannically with a secret police and things like that, I just thought this was superbly done. And then something I don't often do is give an award for best non-fiction, because I read 12 in all, so not many, and they've wildly diverged. There were 2 punk memoirs, which are the only memoirs I will read by people involved in the original punk movement. There was some books on intellectual criticism or literary criticism. And so how can you sort of compare these in a way, how can you compare novels about different things? But anyway, I consider myself slightly more well versed on analysing novels than non-fiction. Anyway, but there are 2 books that I came across this year, which in a way counter what I was saying about why I don't read memoir and why memoirs are a waste of time, if you consider them as truthful. The first is Photo, Phyto, Proto, Nitro by Melissa McCarthy, and the other is The Voice of the Fish by Lars Horn, both British authors, and both expose their inner selves, but without setting out to do it. You know, Mary McCarthy's first book was on sharks, and this book revolves around sharks a lot as well. But she's actually talking about the history of photography from the invention of the camera onwards, and all the things about, having to develop it on paper with all the chemicals, and now that's gone. Obviously we do digital and it's pixels and all that sort of stuff. So it's not a technical book, because I have no sort of technical understanding. It's very accessible, but in a way it's about photography, but through the production rather than the artistry. And as I say, she talks about Jaws, and she talks about biographies of British imperial conquerors. It's just very wide-ranging, but you get to a picture of her and her obsessions through it, which I found really sort of rather pleasing, sitting alongside of some interesting stuff that she was talking about. I mean, when she talks about Jaws, the movie and the book, and the differences between them, it's fascinating stuff. And Horn may be slightly more upfront about this being a book about himself, but he is someone who's never felt comfortable in his body, let alone, is he a man, is he a woman? It's not about necessarily the trans issue for him. It's about being a human being, or being in a human body, and how he's drawn to all things aquatic ever since he went to an aquarium. And again, he's not sort of saying, look at me, I've got stuff to say, you need to hear about the type of person I am, my voice counts too. He's not doing that at all. It's much more subtle, and it's much more interesting in its own right, because it's not blaring and it's not blazoning and shouting at the top of its voice. It's, this is the stuff I've looked into because it relates to me. But this is the conclusions that I've made about, these intellectual issues. And also bodily issues to do with water, to do with life under, the thing he likes to do most is to swim in the sea, not even in swimming pools, but in oceans. So both of these I just found wonderful, but I don't, are they memoirs? I'm just seeing if it says how they're categorised. Yeah, the McCarthy's not categorised. Is Voice of the Fish categorised? A lyric essay. There you go. So that's much more pleasing than calling it a memoir. So that's it. Those are my books of the year. Thank you to everyone who's watched in 2023. There'll be more of the same in 2024. That was the sound of my pile tipping over. There'll be more of the same for better or for worse next year. I've got at least 20 books that I had hoped to get to this year, and that doesn't include the ones that I've started, and they've been sort of perennial, like Joyce's Ulysses and Gass's The Tunnel and the 3 novels by Beckett. You know, I still haven't got through those. So I need to hit the ground running in January. Regular followers will know that I didn't do any prompts really this year, any of the sort of shared community prompts, other than I might have, well, I even cheated on them at March of the Mammoths, where you're supposed to read a book over 750 pages. I actually read 2 books in a trilogy, so I didn't even do that properly. But I didn't do Non-Fiction November for the first time, although I did read one fictional book in November, which is The McCarthy. So I'm sort of probably out of that. So I mean, one I used to like doing was Read More Women, but that seems to have be no longer a sort of penciled in the calendar thing. So I don't anticipate doing any of the community and collective prompts next year, as I didn't this year. So it's just the stuff I want to read. As I say, I've got 20 books that I'm really keen, that I wish I'd got to this year. Failed, but I need to get to them, including Cartarescu's Solenoid. That's the main one. I won't get to it immediately. I need to ease myself because I will be overtired on January the 1st because of all the fireworks keeping me awake. Anyway, so I hope everyone has a great new year and a good 2024. Let's hope that the world becomes a better, more peaceful place, although don't hold your breath on that one. Thank you for all your support, and here's till next year.